So, for those listeners who really struggle with emotional health, you will likely really appreciate this episode. I loved it because Anne is so authentic and real. She is a real person speaking about living in a medical system that doesn't do emotional health that well. It seems like society is still so ignorant, and sometimes I'm not sure if we're going forward or in reverse. But my hope is that having more real conversations like this one, we will get a bit smarter. So it may not be as upbeat as some of my other episodes, but it's well worth the listen. And with that, let's start talking about emotional health. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 10 of I Think I Can podcast, a place where I will teach you to think differently in order to get different results. Today, I have with me Anne Thériault, a Canadian journalist that found her way to a small city in Belgium, where she explored what it meant to live in an inclusive culture, one that was without stigmatism towards mental health. A culture that encompassed unconditional acceptance and lacked dichotomy. Anne is a freelance writer whose interests include history, mental health, gender, feminism, and parenting. Her writings can be found in The Walrus, Long Reads, Chatelaine, and many other places. Welcome, Anne. I want you to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and your journey with mental health. For example, I know that you were born on the East Coast of Canada, yes?
No, Montreal, actually. I've lived all over, though.
Okay.
I did live on the East Coast, Montreal, and then I grew up in Southwestern Ontario in Kitchener, and then I moved to Halifax and was there for 7 years, I think, and then Toronto.
Wow. Wow. Okay. And now you're based in Kingston, correct? Yeah. Okay. So, where did your journey begin in mental health? Like, where did you start feeling like, I don't know, I'm struggling a little bit?
Yeah. For me, I think it's something that's always been very present in my life. I was a very anxious kid. I went through a period when I was 7 where I refused to sleep because I was convinced I was going to die in my sleep, which I laugh about now, but was very anxiety inducing at the time. And I've always had like emotions that I think are very like tuned to 11. But I think like a lot of people, for me, a big trigger point was puberty and being a teenager. And, because I think for so many of us, that's when the social stuff starts being really challenging. And that obviously really impacts mental health, is your social well-being, your social life at school, so I would say that was when I started seeing a therapist and taking medication, was when I was in my teens, and that's been pretty much a constant in my life since then. I've had times where I felt very ashamed of it and wouldn't talk about it, and then now I speak about it quite a lot, and in speaking and writing about it, I have really found, a community of people who have similar experiences or who have similar struggles.
So you as a teenager, you grew up with social media, I'm guessing.
No, I was just a little bit before, like there were like messaging platforms and stuff. I guess it was the dawn of social media. There was like MySpace and like Journal and
okay. Yeah. So but just the pressures of being a teenager and needing to feel accepted and important was a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I felt like there was like an unwritten secret rule book that everybody else had been given a copy to of like, how to.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of describing it. Like in terms of how to act in a social setting.
Yeah, that, and like how to, like, I don't know, have relationships, meet or make boyfriends or whatever. Just all of that. I felt like I was so clueless about.
Okay. 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 So then was it almost a relief to get out of high school and more or less do your own thing? What happened after high school?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. As soon as I was done high school, I was like out of there. I moved to Halifax. And which was, I think, in a lot of ways a good thing. I was far away from most of my family. I do have a lot of family on the East Coast though. So like I had my grandmother and my aunts and uncles and cousins and stuff. But it was a good fresh start. And I think, yeah, university was a good kind of start over for me and a good break from high school.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So where were you always creative? Um, you know, I've read your work and it's very good. So I'm just was a love for writing always there for you?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I would say especially like a love for reading. I was always reading when I was a kid. Like it drove my mom up the wall because I read everywhere. I read at the dinner table, which I wasn't allowed to do. In the bath, on the bus.
Wow.
Like I would get in trouble at school because I would have a book hidden in my desk. Like I just read obsessively. And then I think out of that, I think when you are exposed to that kind of storytelling so much, then you start to try to emulate it. Like it just almost becomes natural.
Exactly. A lot of a lot of creativity going on in your head, a lot of fantasizing, a lot of thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's I just have to ask, the medications then that you were taking, would that, do you feel, did that numb that creativity at all?
I don't know. Certainly they had other negative side effects that I didn't love. I remember worrying about whether they were going to like change my personality or make me less creative. I've kind of had like a lifelong push and pull with medications that I don't love taking them. I do end up taking them sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't think I've ever felt they impacted my creativity.
Okay, that's great. And would you say you also use writing as a way to like a coping mechanism? Like, how I often, as a therapist, will suggest to my clients, journaling can be a wonderful way of processing feelings. So I'm just wondering, did that take you away from, it's a good distraction sort of thing?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, definitely. I think for me, writing is often, especially journaling, is like, I'm often feeling this like big ball of feelings, and I kind of compare it to like a big like snarl of hair or something, and writing it down is almost like combing it out and like getting through the tangles. And then like and that's when I can be like, okay, now I understand where these feelings are coming from, because in the moment the feelings can be so intense that you don't even 100% know all of the things that are triggering them. But then often I find, yeah, the act of sitting down and kind of writing about it is like a lot of light bulb moments of like, oh, this is related to this and this is related to that. And
right. I like the way you describe that, because when I work with my clients, I remind them that, you can't always attend to all the thoughts in your mind at one time, because like you say, there can be many there, but you can attend to your feelings and your emotions. But I like, the fact that you said, but sometimes it's so intense. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a big ball of energy that you don't know what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, because I say that, maybe can try to connect the feeling to the thought, and that way you can sort of, like you say, unravel that ball of hair and comb it out a little bit more. I like that analogy, actually. It's very good. um but but that might even be too hard. It's sort of like the feelings and the emotions are so intense. Like, it's not like I can untangle it in the moment and go, oh, that feeling's connected to that one
Mm-hmm.
thought. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. And but I guess you're saying, just start writing, like, just,
Yeah.
yeah, just let it. Because again, I think what you're describing is channeling the energy out of your body in some way.
Mm-hmm.
um Obviously there's many ways of doing that, like massage or
Mm-hmm.
body work, but I mean, it's not like you can jump into on a massage table instantly, or
Yeah.
I mean, but that's something you can do almost all the
Yeah.
time. Bring a piece of paper and a pen with you wherever you go. Or, I mean, I guess you can open up your notes on your iPhone or whatever you want, but it's
Yeah.
great. Okay, so then where did you kind of get the idea that, hey, I think I have a little bit of a knack or a skill set here?
Yeah, I've always written. Um, that's been a really constant throughout my life. I guess I started writing online after my son was born. I started, I was very lonely and isolated, and I started a blog that was kind of sort of about parenting at the beginning, but it was really more like kind of structured essays. And then I just kind of lucked into making connections through that, and being able to build a career over the years of writing for actual like paying publications.
Yeah, which is, yeah, what a bonus, right? That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Okay, so tell us, so you're interested in mental health, so you're reading about it and learning about it, and then somehow you discovered this town or city in Belgium called Giel, or Giel,
Mm-hmm.
anglicized. What tell us about that. So you ended up traveling there.
Yeah. So it's kind of a little bit of a long story. I'll try not to make it too long. But it started because I was working on a project which never really wound up seeing the light of day, about saints, because I find Catholic saints very fascinating. I find especially kind of the intersection of like gender and sainthood super interesting. And I was reading about this saint, Saint Dymphna, who is the patron saint of those who suffer from mental illnesses or anxiety or whatever.
And
And
I
so,
didn't even know there was such a thing until I too am interested in
yeah,
saints. And her name is pronounced Daphna.
Dymphna.
Dymphna.
Yeah,
Dymphna. Okay, the patron saint of mental health.
yeah. And so I
Wow.
was reading, and I'd read quite a bit about her. So I knew about her, and then there was this one. I stumbled across this one book in the Toronto Reference Library, and that was like the one place that I had read the connection between her and Giel, and it talked a little bit about the history of Giel, and it was like, I was like, how have I never heard of this place? Like, how do I not know any of this? How do none of the other stories about her mention this? Like,
Hmm.
it was so fascinating. Um, and then the
So you you're leaving our readers on a bit of our listeners on a bit of a cliffhanger here. What is it that you discovered about Geel? What is Geel?
So Geel is a town, really a city, a small city in Belgium, and it is famous within the region for this long history of, it was one of its nicknames was the paradise of the insane. And so it became a medieval pilgrimage site for people afflicted by, what at the time they called madness. And because there were so many pilgrims going to Geel to be cured of madness, and of course many of them weren't, and often they would wind up staying there for years. Sometimes they'd be abandoned by their families, and within this town, the townspeople began taking these pilgrims into their homes, and so the culture of the town wound up becoming very influenced by having this kind of large population of people living with significant, what we would now call mental illness. And the townspeople really felt it was kind of a divine duty for them to shelter these pilgrims. But it became a kind of reciprocal relationship, that they would have them stay in their homes, but the pilgrims, who later became known as boarders, would kind of help around the house, do farm work, look after the children, and they would continue to make pilgrimages to the church and offerings, and hope to eventually be cured. And so this was, it just was something that kind of flourished in isolation and continued. It continues today. It's still a program today, although now it's overseen by the state. But sorry, go ahead.
It's almost like taking in foster children in a way. Would you, or is there any? I mean, do the they're called boarders, the people that take them in?
The people that take them in are referred to as foster families. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, they are. Okay.
Yeah.
So they get some sort of compensation for that, I'm guessing.
They do now. Yeah. Now that it is overseen by the state took it over from the church in the 1800s. And they began to financially compensate the families that were taking in boarders.
Okay, and would it be overseen by the Catholic Church? Like, are there priests? Or there? I mean, or no, not really. Is it non?
Now it's secular. It was like up until the 1800s, it was overseen by the church and would have been overseen by kind of the local priest. And there was a convent, so the nuns of the convent were involved as well. But once the state took it over in the 1800s, now it's completely secular. It's tied to, they have a large psychiatric hospital in Geel now as well, and so the program is run through the hospital, although they the boarders are not patients at the hospital, and they are very careful. One of the things I find so interesting about it, they are very careful about language, and so they use the term boarder instead of patient, because to them patient implies a state of dysfunction that needs to be healed, whereas their whole kind of philosophy with the boarder program is rather to create a world around the boarders within which they can function without having to change, that this is who they are, that they are not ill, that the goal is to have them able to live an everyday life.
I love that. Like, you're right. Language is so important. And, even the term mental health, as we were talking about before the recording, I much prefer emotional health. The mental madness, like you say, it's so stigmatized. And that's very different from our current situation, isn't it, in Canada? I mean, you're definitely as I read in your work, I mean, it seems like there's such a dichotomy between crisis and, healthy, I guess. I mean, it's
Yeah.
you're either in a crisis or you're healthy. And do you want to describe a little bit of what your experience was, in our Canadian like psychiatric system here? I mean, what does it mean if going back to when you felt incredibly overwhelmed, and as many people do, and find themselves, either driving to, the ER because
Mhm.
they're going through a panic attack, and they feel like they're going through a heart attack, or just a complete, you know, moment of desperation, and walking into, or getting on the crisis line, or whatever that might be. Like, what was it like for you?
Yeah, I've had a lot of experience with the psychiatric system in Canada. Fortunately, right now, I am in a good place. I'm stable. What I think has helped enormously is I now have a really good support system, that I have a psychiatrist that I see, once a month, and I've been with her for 5 years now, and I have a therapist that I've been with for 10 years, and I have a great family doctor that I've also been with for over 10 years. So that has all really helped. But before I had all of those things in place, it was, yeah, like I said, it was like a binary of crisis and fine. And there's not a lot available for the kind of in between, where you're kind of like, my symptoms are escalating. Some intervention would be helpful before it gets to a crisis point. But there's just so little. And what does exist is there's often long wait lists. It's hard to access. It's often, programs that run between 9 to 5. So if you work a 9 to 5 job, then how are you going to do 2 hours of CBT, 3 times a week? And a lot of it is not publicly funded. It's, there's just so many gaps in care. And it's frustrating because often, doctors want to jump to the quickest, cheapest fix, which is medication, which is not, isn't something that, it's a good tool. It's not something that helps everybody. It should be one tool, I think, in a toolbox. When your life is falling apart, like that's not necessarily going to help.
No, exactly. And then, there's that stabilization phase too, right? I mean, it's not an instant fix, that's for sure. And there's side effects, and like you say, I mean, I'm glad you're expressing that. It's I need, like, your support system is the most important part of this, and then finding your way of handling your own emotions, and writing, let's say, being one, but there could be many other ones. But just knowing that, I have a backup plan must make you feel so much more at ease.
That and the fact that they are all people who have known me now over like a period of time. Because before, what would happen was that, I would have a crisis, I would go to the ER, I would get referred to a psychiatrist within the hospital system, I would wait 6 months because that was the waiting list period. I would see them once or twice, and then I would never see them again. And then it would start the cycle over of, going to the ER, wait list, new psychiatrist. So there was no real continuity of care.
Can I ask
Sorry, go ahead.
What did they do for you at the ER? Like, I'm kind of like, first of all, anybody's experience at the ER is horrible because, as far as I know, you're waiting for hours before
Yeah.
being seen. But and then once you're seen, what happens?
So my experiences have mostly been with the psychiatric ER at CAMH in Toronto. So it is, I guess, in the sense it's a specialized ER. So at least they kind of know why you're there. But I mean, unless you're like in a real crisis and need to be admitted, which is very rare, the most they do is they'll write a prescription and a referral. So it's not, it's not instant. It's not accessible care because, like I said, it's often a long wait list. But I mean, also, I guess what else can the system is set up to be like? What else can they do? Their job is to decide whether you need to be admitted or to kind of quickly get people out so they can get more patients through.
Right. Okay. So would you say you're much more observant of others around you that are possibly struggling? Like, I guess what makes Geel so unique is the fact, like, it's just so inclusive, like you say. I mean, one person walking around that's maybe feeling, I don't know, that, I mean, there's so much more acceptance there. Whereas, this person that would be walking around any other city would be looked at differently. So,
yeah. And I mean, I think for sure a layer of discomfort and anxiety for a lot of people with mental illness is that layer of knowing that if you are symptomatic in public, you're drawing attention, and maybe drawing judgment, and that's embarrassing or humiliating, can be, depending on people's reactions. For sure. And and I should say, like, the program in Geel now is so much smaller than it once was for a variety of reasons, but it is still kind of within the culture of the town that somebody can be pretty obviously experiencing hallucinations or other kind of symptoms of psychosis out in public, and nobody really bats an eye.
Right.
And so I think that really, for the boarders and other people experiencing that in the town, that kind of removes that layer of anxiety, of fear, of.
No, good point. Yeah. So, what would you like to see more of, here? I mean, living, whether it's Toronto or Los Angeles, like in any city, right? I mean, where, what would you feel would be ideal, in that sort of same situation? What would your hope be for people who aren't suffering in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be so much more public education on mental illness in general, but also on maybe de-escalation techniques, or
point.
Like I had an experience on a bus a few months ago, or I guess longer ago now, because it was before the pandemic. I don't know what year is it?
Yeah, exactly. Where are we? Who knows?
But there was somebody who was quite obviously experiencing some kind of mental distress, and he got into it with the bus driver, and the bus driver just kept escalating it and escalating the conflict. And I was like, what are you doing? And he escalated the conflict to the point where he was like, I'm kicking you off the bus. And then the man was becoming very upset because he was on his way to a doctor's appointment, and if he couldn't take the bus, he had no way of getting there. And then so he was getting really upset about that, and then that was making the driver angrier. And I eventually, when he made the guy get off the bus, so I got off with him. I helped him find a taxi. I paid for him to take a taxi to his appointment. But I thought, like, that bus driver could have handled that so many different ways. And maybe if he had known how to diffuse or de-escalate the situation, it wouldn't have become what it was. Because this man, Tim, was clearly, he was not a danger.
No.
He was experiencing emotional distress, but he wasn't a danger to other passengers. He wasn't a danger to himself or to the bus driver. And I just think, like, even in situations like that, if people knew better how to de-escalate and diffuse, it could make such a difference.
That's an excellent point. Yeah. You know, and what do you that's one area that can really be improved. What do you think in terms of just, you know, I had one client that said to me, you know, I'm sick of the way, like, she described it, like this toxic happiness that, you know, sometimes like plastered all over, you know, like, how do you feel about that? Like when people are, I mean, I don't want to say what your point, like what your view on optimism is, but like, you know, how would you describe that? Like, because it's true, some people are much more optimistic than others and just always seem to be, you know, happy. And so when they're trying to prophesize that, you know, why don't you just I don't know, appreciate or turn to gratitude? Or, I mean, like, sometimes that's appropriate, but it's not always the answer for someone that's struggling, right? So like, how do you perceive those articles or people's?
Yeah, I've certainly found stuff like that very frustrating. You know, I think if we're talking on like an interpersonal level, you know, most people are trying to help and or want to help and don't know how, and you know, end up with these kinds of like, well, everything works out, or everything happens for a reason, or it's all going to be okay. And even, you know, if those things wind up being true, that's not helpful to hear in the moment. I've tried to start being better about articulating what I need out of a conversation. You know, if I'm in a bad place, I'll try to say, you know, I just want you to listen. I don't want advice. I don't want suggestions. I just want you to empathize.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Like, I think you're taking responsibility. You know, you're taking some responsibility in that conversation to express what you need in that moment, rather than, you know, expecting the listener to just know exactly what to do or say. It's yeah, I think that's, it's probably worked. It's probably helped, right? For you?
Yeah, I think it's helped. Definitely. But I do get, like, I get the impetus to want to fix stuff. You know, I'm, as much as I'll say like, oh, you know, I just want people to listen or whatever, I'm also the kind of person who will be like, oh, you have this problem? Well, have you tried this and this? And like, why don't we like do this? And which I know is not what everybody wants to hear, but it is, you know, it's so ingrained, I think, in us to want to offer opinions, solicited or otherwise, or solutions.
Right. Like, yeah, I think that's what you're saying. Like, people's intention is, you know, to help.
Yeah.
But yeah, but you're also playing a bit of a helping role by telling people, this is what I need.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. I was just sort of curious about that, just because, yeah, it might be, it's just sort of like, in the moment, those things don't really help
Mhm.
all the time. So, okay.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, when maybe we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about, because actually the way I found you is through reading one of your articles
Mhm.
that was posted in Shadow Lane, actually, the magazine, and it talked about how to find new friends, specifically during the pandemic, like an adult
Yeah.
trying to make new friends, right? Like we always talk to kids that, like, mom, you know, uh, you know, the like kids talking about friends, right? Like how to make new
Mhm.
friends, but adults need to make new friends too. And it's a very common topic that is brought up to me. How are we supposed to do this? Anyone from like a 70-year-old, woman to a 25-year-old, um, yeah, guy. Like, I mean, how do you make new friends when, yeah, you move cities, which was your case,
Mhm.
but even like I just think even sometimes seasons of life, right? Like, I mean, sometimes having a child
Mhm.
and all of a sudden at 28, 29, you realize the days of partying and drinking are over, but your old friends are still doing that.
Mhm.
And you realize, this isn't really for me anymore. How do I meet people that are more like me
Mhm.
now, and sharing what I need? So what did you find out when, through your experience of moving from Toronto to Kingston and starting a whole new life there?
Yeah. It was hard. It was hard. That was harder than I anticipated. I think, especially socially, after having, at the time, like 15 months of pandemic. So not really even seeing my friends in Toronto very much.
Mm,
Um, and then so I really felt like my social skills were very uh, rusty. And on top of that, I think there are certain stereotypes about people from Toronto. And so I felt like that would kind of was like another layer that made it
oh,
harder.
interesting. Okay.
Um,
Being what? Being unfriendly?
yeah, it was snobby, unfriendly, and particularly in within the rest of Ontario right now, especially during the pandemic, there's kind of this grudge against people from Toronto who are moving to other communities because they're buying up real estate in smaller communities, and there's the perception that they're pushing out people who might have bought these houses from within the community.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like a whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, and for certainly there is an element of truth to that, and as housing prices escalate, but also like I'm someone, I couldn't afford housing in my own community, which is why I left Toronto, because the prices
Yeah.
there were so expensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so anyway, yeah, it was, and I think it started with when we moved here, and my son was really not thrilled about the move because he's really like a big city kid, and
How
so
old
I
is he?
was like, he's 10.
Okay.
He's 10. And he'd lived in Toronto his entire life. And that was just kind of everything he knew. And, we lived in the city core. So he was like really a city kid.
Yeah.
And so at first I was really gangbusters. Like I was like, all right, I'm going to go out and make friends for him. Or like meet other parents so that he can meet kids his age. but I was also, I was very lonely, and this was at a point where case counts were a little bit lower, so people were socializing, and I just thought, like, how am I going to meet people? And most of the people, like I said in the article, most of the people that I met that have become friends, I met through social media, which I think is increasingly more and more of like a way that people are meeting is online, whether that's, dating wise, they're meeting through online dating sites, or socially they're meeting, often it's like through friends of friends, or even just random people. But that has been really good, actually, just meeting people that I've kind of, I've already had interactions with them. I know we have maybe similar interests, or similar politics or whatever. And I'm hopeful that after the pandemic, maybe I can like take a pottery class or something, or do something in the real world where I can meet people.
Exactly. Because pre-COVID, I mean, there were sort of, social like possibilities in terms of meetup groups. That would be one where it seemed to make a lot of sense. I mean, if you love basket weaving, there's probably a meetup group that everyone meets and weaves baskets together, but now that's not possible because of the pandemic. But you did, okay, so from what I gained from that article, there were 4 or so ways that you gathered were helpful, that you attempted, and I'm just gonna read them off here. The one is the one we just discussed: meeting strangers off of the internet or social media, attending a neighbor barbecue or something of that nature, and another one was trying to chat with people, at a yoga studio or coffee shop or bookstore. So sort of like randomly, talking to somebody in the lineup. And then the last one was going on a blind, friend date, which that was fun. I thought that was cute that you said that. And you rated them, saying that, going on a blind friend date was the best, like a 10 out of 10, whereas randomly chatting somebody up at a coffee shop got a 1 out of 10. So it must be that, you tried some of these and failed, or felt like you succeeded. So how do you go on a blind friend date? How does that work?
So in this case, it was someone, so he knew me from Twitter, but also we had met in person because I gave him a bunch of moving boxes because he was moving and we had just moved. And he knew I was having a hard time meeting people, and he said, well, I've got this friend, I think you would really get along with them. Why don't I'll send an email to the two of you and you can connect. And so this person and I, we decided we would meet, and it was funny because we were like, we'll just meet on the bench in the park. And then so it really did kind of feel like a blind date, where I was like, is this you? Are you this person? Right. Are you here to meet someone named Anne? But it was great. We went for a walk and we talked for quite a bit, and we've seen each other a few times since then. And
nice. Yeah, especially since he's new as well.
No, they live in the neighborhood. They've been here for a year.
Oh, okay. Well, fairly new.
Yeah.
So and I have to ask, did you actually try to talk to a random person at the
I mean, I've definitely, like, at the yoga studio after the class, I'll sometimes kind of like be slow about putting my coat on and, talk to the kind of regulars who hang out and like talk about after class. And
yeah,
but I mean, that hasn't really gone anywhere. And
no, I know it is tough. And I really feel like I say, it's more common than I think one would think.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone moving to a new city or just the pandemic. Like sometimes I think friendships reach expiry dates.
Mm-hmm.
Even like a long-term elementary friend
Mm-hmm.
is it's someone that you've seen grow distant from over the years. But that's not to say you still want to get out there and chat it up with somebody or go for a walk, like you say. So it's important that we I don't know, again, another area that I think society needs to think about a little bit more and give people somehow more options to make it
Mm-hmm.
easier. So, but
Yeah, I feel like, it's hard. It's because too, like, where are the spaces where even people are conducting these friendships? Like, it feels like, especially if it's in the evenings, so many of the spaces are like bars. Well, if you have somebody who doesn't drink,
right.
then what are you gonna do? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
if
Yeah.
like when I think about like my grandparents' generation, where they had all of these kind of like social clubs and like
Right.
that they would just go and have activities and do stuff for the evening. And they were, my grandmother was always having like dinner parties, and they were just involved in so much. Or even through, it's funny, like my grandfather was a big atheist. He was really not religious, but he stayed involved in the church because he loved the social aspect of it. And he was always like doing stuff, like he was in the choir, and he did all kinds of stuff through the church because that was the social life for him.
You're right. No, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I mean, I as well grew up, going to Sunday mass
Mm-hmm.
every Sunday. And after mass, you're right. People just gathered, in front of the church and talked. And, yeah. And then there was such things as, fall suppers or,
Mm-hmm.
fall, and in the different communities. How about, like, I was going to ask, do you feel Europe has more, um, opportunities for something like that, like when you traveled like to these towns? Like, I don't know, maybe that's a difficult question, but I'm just wondering, you know is it easier maybe in different, well, obviously in different cultures or different countries than others? When I think about, I mean, there are some countries that still have, I mean, large communities or tribes and things like that, right, where you do feel like you're part of a community and you're not in your own house, your own dwelling, after 6 p.m. no one's out or something like that. But did you find it any different? Like, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I was only really there so briefly.
mhm.
I've spent maybe 2 weeks there total my entire life. But I do find, like, even in small places, there is a nightlife, in that people are like out on the streets in the evening,
Yeah.
and there's, public festivals and stuff. And one thing I found in Paris that really blew my mind is that people take such advantage of public spaces. Like,
Mm.
you know, any park or any like even little green space you'd see is just like full of like little groups of people, and it's like such a stereotype, but they would all have like a bottle of wine, and they would just be like out enjoying being outdoors, enjoying people's company, which I feel like is much rarer in Canada. We don't necessarily use our parks in that same way. And I thought that was really neat.
No, you're right. I think so. Yeah, I think every European city would probably have a similar sort of space. Yeah, like center of the city sort of thing. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess, is there anything else that you'd love to kind of, express to our listeners in terms of what more you think we can do? Let's say those that aren't struggling with emotional health, maybe as much as others, something that can be helpful, or even like you said, you talked about your coping mechanisms. Maybe there's others. Like, anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for people like you said who maybe aren't struggling with emotional health, I mean, and if that's something that they want to kind of be better friends and neighbors to people who are, is just if they can find ways to educate themselves, to read articles and books about it. Like, I do think it is such a misunderstood thing in general. And like I said, just be better listeners. And
yes. Yeah, exactly. Okay. What can we look out from you in future months or years? What do you got on the?
I'm actually working on a book on the history of it's so in the early stages now, it's hard to describe, but the history of kind of mental health treatment in the West, that's going to kind of center on Geel, but also look at the history of institutionalization and what exists outside of institutionalization, and even the kind of evolution of inpatient mental health care, and what that has looked like, what it looks like now, what it could look like in the future. So
nice.
Yeah.
Great. Good. Okay. I'm glad you're using your talent, and you will continue to.
Thank you.
So, okay. Well, thanks so much, Anne. It was just a pleasure hearing your story and educating us further on mental health, emotional health. I mean, especially for me as a therapist, I found this very enlightening. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks once again for joining me on another great episode of I Think I Can podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And until next week, treat each day like it was your last, because each new day is a privilege that we shan't take for granted. Cheers and have a great week. Bye-bye.